It was a quiet Saturday morning when I drove 3 hours to a lakeside lodge with a bouquet of yellow tulips on the passenger seat. The night before, my wife had smiled, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "It's only a girls' weekend. I'll be home tomorrow." I wanted to surprise her. Instead, I stopped behind a tree outside Bungalow 11. She was laughing with another man, his hand resting on her back, like he belonged there. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. 10 minutes passed before the cabin door slowly opened, and the person who walked outside destroyed everything I believed about my family. Before we go any further, I'm so grateful you're here with me today. Drop a comment and tell me what city or country are you watching from. I read every single one. This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but the lessons inside are ones worth carrying. I have a particular way of starting the day that I have not changed in 40 years. I unlock the front door of the shop at 6:45 in the morning, before the street outside wakes up, before the first car turns onto West Elm, before Springfield remembers it has places to be. I make a cup of coffee in the back room, black, no sugar. Same ceramic mug I have used since 1987. And I sit down at my workbench and I listen. Most people, when they walk into Mason's Clockworks for the first time, stop just inside the door and go very still. They do not expect the sound. Dozens of clocks on the walls, clocks on shelves, clocks in various stages of disassembly on the long wooden tables, and every single one of them ticking. Not in unison, in their own rhythms, their own tempos. A layered conversation of gears and springs that fills the room like something living. Customers have told me it is soothing. One woman told me it sounded like rain. An old veteran told me it sounded like a heartbeat. I told him that was exactly right. I am Harold Mason. I am 65 years old. I have spent 40 years in this shop on West Elm Street in Springfield, Missouri, bringing broken things back to life. Pocket watches with cracked mainsprings, mantle clocks with seized escapements, grandfather clocks that had not run in 30 years because someone wound them too tight and never had them properly serviced. People bring me the things they have given up on. That is more or less the job. I did not plan to become a clockmaker. I studied mechanical engineering for 2 years at Missouri State before I wandered into a shop downtown, watched an old man named Earl Cutter disassemble a 19th century carriage clock with hands the size of toothpicks, and understood in about 4 minutes that I had found the thing I was going to do with my life. Earl took me on as an apprentice. I worked for him for 6 years. When he retired in 1994, he sold me the lease on this building for less than it was worth, because he said he wanted to make sure the work kept going. Diane was with me the morning I opened Mason's Clockworks under my own name. She stood at the front window and taped the paper sign I had made to the glass, hand-lettered, slightly crooked. And then she turned around with the biggest smile I had ever seen on a human face and said, "Harold Mason, you are going to be just fine." She was right. She usually was. Diane and I were married for 31 years. She taught 3rd grade at Robertson Elementary for 28 of those years and loved every single one of her students with a ferocity that embarrassed some of the parents and delighted the children. She made the best apple pie in Greene County, and I am not saying that because she was my wife. I am saying it because 3 separate people told me so at her funeral, including a woman who had never met her before that day and had simply tried a slice at the reception. Diane laughed the way people laugh when something genuinely surprises them. She cried at commercials. She kept a list on the refrigerator of every bird she had identified in our backyard and updated it with a red pen whenever a new one appeared. She died on a Tuesday morning in March, 5 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 4 months and 11 days. I was with her for every one of them. I want to tell you what the house felt like after. I want to tell you accurately because it matters for the rest of this story. It did not feel empty in the way that word usually suggests. Empty implies a space that was once full and is now lacking something. What the house felt like was wrong. Like a clock mechanism with a missing gear. Everything looked the same. The furniture was in the same positions. The bird list was still on the refrigerator. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand because I could not bring myself to move them. But the sound was gone. The particular quality of having another person in a space, the small noises, the presence, the weight of someone else existing nearby, that was gone. And every room in that house reminded me of its absence. I threw myself into the shop. I worked 6 days a week instead of 5. I took on restoration projects I would normally have passed to younger hands. Complicated movements, delicate mechanisms, work that required hours of concentration and left no room for anything else in my head. It helped. It was not a solution, but it helped. Emily came by when she could. She lived 40 minutes away in Nixa, working as a dental hygienist, and she had her own life, her own routines. She would come on Sunday afternoons sometimes and sit at the kitchen table, and we would talk about her mother, about the shop, about nothing in particular. I was grateful for those visits, in the way you are grateful for something that takes the edge off a pain that is otherwise constant. It was Emily, about 2 years after Diane passed, who mentioned that a friend of hers knew a woman named Vanessa who had recently moved to Springfield. "She's nice, Dad," Emily said, with the careful casualness of someone who has rehearsed the sentence. "She's smart. She works in healthcare administration. I just thought, I don't know, I thought maybe you'd enjoy having someone to have dinner with." I told her I would think about it. I thought about it for 3 weeks. Then I called the number Emily gave me. The first time I met Vanessa Carlisle, she used her maiden name at that point, was at a restaurant on South Campbell Avenue called The Precinct. She was already seated when I arrived, and she stood up to greet me with the kind of easy confidence that comes from being comfortable in your own skin. She was 56 years old, with dark hair cut short and a direct way of looking at you that I found immediately refreshing. She asked me about the shop within the first 5 minutes and then listened, actually listened, while I talked about escapement mechanisms and the difference between a lever and a cylinder movement. She asked follow-up questions, good ones. By the time we finished dinner, I felt something I had not felt in 2 years. Not love, it was far too early for love, but warmth. The specific warmth of being in the company of someone who is genuinely interested in who you are. I drove home that night and sat on the front porch for a while, looking at the street. The bird list was still on the refrigerator. Diane's reading glasses were still on the nightstand. Those things had not changed. But something for the first time in a long time felt like it might be moving forward. I should have paid more attention to who introduced us. I should have asked more questions about how Emily had come to know Vanessa's circle of friends and how that circle connected to people I had never met. I should have been more careful. I spent 40 years bringing dead things back to life. I did not know someone in my own house was already studying how to take mine apart. Vanessa and I were married 11 months after that first dinner on South Campbell Avenue. Small ceremony, just family and a handful of close friends at a chapel on East Sunshine Street that Vanessa had found and liked because she said it had good light. She was right about that. The morning sun came through the east windows and made everything look warmer than it probably was. I stood at the front of that chapel and watched her walk toward me, and my chest felt so full I had to remind myself to breathe. Emily cried during the ceremony. Happy tears, she told me afterward, squeezing my arm in the parking lot with a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "She's good for you, Dad. I can already tell." I believed her. I had no reason not to. The first months of marriage were quieter and better than I had expected. Vanessa moved into the house, the rear half of the same building on West Elm that held the shop, connected by a door off the kitchen, with 2 suitcases and a box of books. And she did it without trying to change anything. She did not rearrange the furniture. She did not suggest we redecorate. When she noticed Diane's bird list still on the refrigerator, she read it carefully, top to bottom, and then said, "A painted bunting. I've never seen one of those." She did not ask me to take it down. I loved her for that more than I knew how to say. She cooked on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I cooked on Mondays and Fridays. Weekends we figured out as they came. She had a habit of humming while she worked in the kitchen, not any particular song, just a low, tuneless sound that meant she was content, and I found myself listening for it when I came in from the shop in the evenings. It became one of my favorite sounds in that house. Emily visited more frequently after the wedding. She would come on Sunday afternoons, sometimes staying for dinner, helping Vanessa in the kitchen, while I sat at the table and watched the two of them laugh about things I only half understood. There was a warmth to those evenings that I had not felt in years. I told Walter Greer about it one morning when he stopped by the shop for coffee. And Walter, who had been my closest friend since our daughters played on the same softball team in the summer of 2003, shook his head and grinned and said, "Harold, you sound like a man who finally stopped arguing with being happy." Good. It was exhausting watching you resist it. It was about 4 months into the marriage when Vanessa introduced the supplement. She set the amber bottle on the kitchen counter one morning while I was finishing my coffee, with the quiet efficiency of someone who has already thought the matter through. "I've been reading about cognitive support for men over 60, she said, her voice warm and practical at the same time. "This one has good reviews. Ginkgo B12, a few other things. It won't hurt you, and it might help with focus and memory." She smiled and touched my hand. "I just want to take care of you." I picked up the bottle and read the label. It looked reasonable enough. Vitamins, herbal extracts, nothing alarming. I was 65 years old, and I had never been particularly disciplined about supplements. Vanessa was in healthcare administration. She knew more about this than I did. "Sure," I said. "Thank you." She kissed me on the cheek and went to get ready for work. And I took the first capsule with the last of my coffee. It tasted like nothing in particular. I thought nothing of it. Within 6 weeks, I began to notice small things going wrong. I left my reading glasses in the bathroom when I was certain I had brought them to the workbench. I forgot a supplier's name mid-sentence, while on the phone, a man I had worked with for 11 years and had to cover it with a cough and a redirect. I missed a Tuesday morning appointment with a customer who had driven in from Joplin because I had written it in my calendar for Wednesday. The customer was gracious about it. I was not gracious with myself. "It happens," Vanessa said that evening, rubbing my shoulders. I sat at the kitchen table, with a frustration I could not fully name burning behind my eyes. "You're working too hard. You always push yourself too hard, Harold." Emily called that week and asked how I was doing, and when I mentioned the forgetfulness, her voice shifted into something that sounded like concern but moved a little too quickly into reassurance. "Dad, it's normal," she said. "You're 65. Your brain needs support. Are you taking the supplement Vanessa got you every day?" I told her I was. "Good," she said. "Keep taking it. It takes time to work." I thanked her and hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment with the phone in my hand, looking at the amber bottle on the counter. Something moved through me then. Not quite a thought, not quite a feeling. More like the particular sensation I get in the shop when a clock sounds almost right, but not quite. A sound that is close enough to correct that most people would not notice, but that sets something in my ears on edge. I shook it off. I told myself I was tired. I told myself Vanessa was right that I worked too hard, that 65 was not 50, and I needed to accept that. I picked up the amber bottle, shook one capsule into my palm, and swallowed it with a glass of water. That was my first mistake, and I would not understand it was a mistake for another 3 months. By the 3rd month, the forgetting had become something I could no longer explain away. It was not dramatic. That was the thing about it. It never announced itself loudly enough to demand immediate attention. It arrived in small increments, the way a clock loses time when the mainspring is wound just slightly too loose. A minute here, a minute there. Nothing that stops the hands, everything that throws off the accuracy. I walked into the back room of the shop one Tuesday morning, looking for the magnification lamp I used for fine movement work. A lamp I had owned for 16 years and kept in the same spot on the second shelf without exception. It was not there. I checked the workbench, the storage cabinet, the front counter. My heart knocked against my ribs with a frustration that felt almost like panic. 20 minutes later, I found it on the second shelf, exactly where it always was. I had walked past it twice without seeing it. I stood there holding that lamp with both hands and felt something cold move through my chest. That evening, Vanessa noticed my face the moment I came through the door. She crossed the kitchen and put both hands on my arms and looked at me directly. "Harold, what happened?" "Nothing," I said. "Just a long day." "That's not a long day face," she said firmly. "That's a something scared you face. Talk to me." So I told her about the lamp, about the 20 minutes, about the cold feeling in my chest. As I spoke, her expression moved through concern and into something that looked like careful, measured worry, the kind of worry that has already been thinking ahead. "This has been happening more than you've told me," she said. It was not a question. "Some," I admitted. She exhaled and pressed her lips together. "I think we should have you seen by someone, a neurologist maybe, just to rule things out." Her voice was steady, but her hands tightened slightly on my arms. "I love you, Harold. I am not going to pretend I'm not worried." My throat tightened. Here was a woman who looked at me and saw something worth worrying about. I nodded and told her I would think about it. She made dinner, and I sat at the table and tried to remember the last time someone had looked at me with that specific expression. The one that meant, "You matter enough to be afraid for." I thought about Diane. Then I made myself stop. It was 2 weeks after that conversation when Vanessa mentioned Conrad Bale for the first time. "A friend of mine from her professional network," she said over dinner on a Wednesday evening, passing me the bread without looking up. "He's in real estate investment, very successful apparently, looking to connect with established local business owners. She thought you two might have things to talk about." I told her I'd mention it. "I'm a clockmaker," I said. "Not sure what I have to offer a real estate investor." Vanessa smiled. "He collects antique timepieces apparently. She thought you'd get along." I said I did not mind meeting him. That was how Conrad Bale entered my life. Through a dinner conversation, through a casual mention, as something unremarkable. He arrived at the house the following Friday evening in a dark gray Mercedes that he parked with the precision of a man accustomed to valet service, finding no valets present. He was 70 years old, broad through the chest, with silver hair, and the kind of unhurried movement that comes from decades of never being rushed by anyone. His handshake was firm without being aggressive. His suit cost more than my truck. "Harold," he said, smiling, like we were already old friends. "I've heard a great deal about you and about the shop. A 40-year independent business in this economy? That's not luck. That's character." My chest warmed slightly despite myself. "Come in," I said. Over drinks in the living room, Conrad talked easily about antique movements, about a Patek Philippe pocket watch he had acquired at auction the previous year, about the difference between Swiss and German clockmaking traditions. He knew enough to sound credible and asked enough questions to seem genuinely curious. He was, I realized, very good at making a person feel interesting. At one point, he leaned forward and said, "You know, a man who builds something over 40 years the way you have, he ought to have good people around him making sure it's protected. Financially, legally, all of it." He smiled again, easy and warm. "Just something I've been thinking about since Vanessa mentioned your situation." My situation. An odd phrase. I turned it over in my mind, but said nothing, because the wine was good, and Conrad was charming, and I was 65 years old and slightly foggy from a supplement I had no reason to question. I noticed as he was leaving that he and Vanessa stood at the front door together for just a moment longer than necessary. They spoke quietly. I could not hear what they said. I told myself it was nothing. I had become very good at telling myself things were nothing. It was a Thursday evening in late March when Vanessa mentioned the trip. We were finishing dinner, pot roast, her recipe. The one she made when the weather was still cold enough to justify something heavy and warm. She set down her fork and said casually, the way you mention something you have already decided. Gloria called today. She wants to do a girls' weekend at Table Rock Lake, Lakeview Lodge, out near Branson. I think I'm going to go. Just Friday night through Sunday afternoon. Gloria, from your book club, I asked. The same, she smiled and picked up her wine glass. I could use the break, honestly. It's been a long few months. I told her, of course, go, enjoy herself. She deserved a break, and I meant every word of it. What I did not tell her was that the moment she said Table Rock Lake, something moved in my chest, a warmth, a specific memory. Diane and I had gone to that lake twice, once for our 20th anniversary, once just because it was a Sunday in October and we felt like driving. Both times we had stayed at a small place near the water and eaten breakfast on the dock and watched the herons work the shallows in the early morning light. It was her favorite place in Missouri. I thought about that all evening. I thought about it while I loaded the dishwasher, and while I sat in the shop for an hour before bed turning a small movement over in my hands without really seeing it. By the time I called Walter Greer the next morning, I had already half made up my mind. She's going to Table Rock Lake for the weekend, I told him. Walter was on his second cup of coffee. I could hear him stirring it on the other end of the line. I'm thinking about driving out Saturday morning, surprising her. Walter made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. Harold Mason romantic gesture. Never thought I'd live to see it. Don't make it a thing, I said. I'm not making it a thing. I think it's a great idea. He paused. Get her flowers. Women like flowers. Don't show up empty-handed like some kind of accountant. I wasn't going to show up empty-handed. You absolutely were, Walter said. I know you. He was probably right. I stopped at a flower stand on South Campbell Avenue Saturday morning before I got on the highway. Yellow tulips, because Diane had always said yellow tulips were cheerful without being dramatic. And somewhere along the way, that opinion had become mine, too. I pulled onto Highway 65, heading south toward Branson, just after 8 in the morning. The sky was the particular pale blue that Missouri does in late March, the kind of blue that looks almost too clean to be real. And the Ozark Hills on either side of the highway were just beginning to show the first faint green of early spring. I had the window cracked and the radio on low and the tulips on the passenger seat. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the tightness in my chest ease into something that almost resembled peace. I thought about Vanessa's face when she saw me. I thought about breakfast on the dock, if they had a dock. I thought about the herons. I did not think about Conrad Bale. I did not think about the amber bottle on the kitchen counter. I did not think about the forgetting, or the way Emily's voice had shifted on the phone, or the phrase, "my situation," spoken by a man I had known for 3 weeks. I was a husband, surprising his wife at a lake on a Saturday morning in spring. That was all. I pulled into the Lakeview Lodge parking lot at 9:47. I remember the exact time because I checked my watch when I stepped out of the truck, an old habit, the clockmaker's reflex. The air smelled like pine and cold water, and something faintly sweet I could not name. I tucked the tulips under my arm and started walking toward the bungalow section. It was the last ordinary moment I would have for a very long time. The bungalows at Lakeview Lodge were arranged along a stone path that curved away from the main building toward the water. I followed it with the tulips under my arm, reading the numbers on the small wooden signs beside each door. The lake was visible through the trees to my left, Table Rock in late March, still and blue-green and enormous. The kind of water that makes you feel how small you are, without making you feel bad about it. I was looking for Bungalow 11. Vanessa had mentioned the name of the lodge, but not the room number, so I had called ahead the previous evening, told the front desk I was surprising my wife, and asked which room Gloria Howell's reservation was under. The young man at the desk found it without hesitation. 11. End of the path closest to the water. I was smiling when I turned the last bend in the path. I stopped walking. Vanessa was standing outside Bungalow 11. She was wearing the blue cardigan I had given her for Christmas, and her hair was down, and she was laughing at something. A real laugh, head back, completely unguarded. The kind of laugh I had not heard from her in several weeks. The man she was laughing with was Conrad Bale. His hand was at the small of her back, not passing, resting. The way a hand rests when it has been there before and expects to be there again. I stepped back behind the nearest tree without thinking. My body made the decision before my mind caught up. The tulips were still under my arm. I became aware of them the way you become aware of something absurd at the worst possible moment. 11 yellow tulips wrapped in green paper, bought at a flower stand on South Campbell Avenue because Walter told me women like flowers. I pressed my back against the bark of that tree, and I could not move. My legs had gone to something that was not quite solid. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I was certain they could hear it 20 feet away. I pressed my hand flat against the tree trunk and focused on the feeling of the bark against my palm. Rough, real, something that was not moving. I loved my wife more than anything, and I stood there for 10 minutes without moving and without making a sound. Then the door to Bungalow 11 opened again. Emily stepped out. My daughter. My 35-year-old daughter, who was supposed to be in Nixa, who had called me 4 days ago to ask how I was feeling and told me to keep taking my supplement. She stepped out of that bungalow with a coffee mug in her hand and a smile on her face, and she said something to Conrad that made him laugh. And she touched his arm, easy, familiar, the touch of someone who has been comfortable in a person's company for a long time. The pain that went through my chest in that moment was unlike anything I can accurately describe. It was not like a heart attack, though it was in that neighborhood. It was more like something structural giving way. A load-bearing wall I had not known I was leaning on. I watched the three of them for another few minutes. They moved in and out of the bungalow with the ease of people who had been doing this for a while. No nervousness, no looking over shoulders. Why would they? They believed I was 65 miles away, slightly foggy from a supplement my wife had chosen for me, forgetting where I put my reading glasses. At some point, I became aware that my hand was no longer pressed against the tree. I was holding the tulips at my side, stems down, flowers pointing at the ground. I looked at them for a moment. Then I set them against the base of the tree, gently, the way you set something down that you will not be picking back up. I walked back to the parking lot. I got into my truck. I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel and stared through the windshield at the tree line and the pale blue sky above it. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. I had expected them to shake. A watchmaker does not react to a broken movement. He observes it. He identifies the failure point. He decides what the repair requires. I started the engine and pulled out of the Lakeview Lodge parking lot. I did not look back. 3 hours and 40 minutes. That is how long the drive back from Table Rock Lake to Springfield takes when you do not stop, do not turn on the radio, and spend every mile trying to keep your hands steady on the wheel. I made it without stopping once. The house on West Elm was empty when I got back. Of course it was. Vanessa was not due home until Sunday afternoon. I stood in the front hallway for a moment after I closed the door behind me, and the quiet of the house landed on me like something physical, heavy across my shoulders, pressing down. I walked to the kitchen. The amber supplement bottle was on the counter where it always was. I looked at it for a long moment, and my stomach turned over so hard I had to grip the edge of the counter with both hands. I went to the shop. I did not work. I sat at my bench and looked at the clocks on the walls and listened to them tick. All of them at once, that layered sound I had heard every day for 40 years. Usually it settled me. That afternoon, it did not settle me. It just reminded me that time was moving, whether I was ready for it or not. At 9 o'clock, I picked up the phone and called Walter. He answered on the second ring. "Harold, thought you were surprising Vanessa at the lake." "I was," I said. Something in my voice stopped him. I heard him set something down, his coffee mug probably. "Talk to me," he said. So I told him. All of it. Vanessa and Conrad outside Bungalow 11, his hand at the small of her back. Emily stepping out with her coffee mug and her easy smile touching Conrad's arm like she had known him for years. The tulips I had left at the base of a tree. The 3-hour drive home with the radio off. Walter did not say anything until I finished. Then he exhaled long and slow, the exhale of a man absorbing something that has weight to it. "Emily," he said. Not a question, just the word with everything that word contained. "Emily," I confirmed. My voice cracked slightly on it. I pressed my fist against my sternum and held it there until the cracking stopped. "Harold, listen to me carefully," Walter said. His voice had changed. The easy warmth was still there, but underneath it was something harder. The voice of the man who had spent 22 years with the Springfield Police Department before he retired. "Do not call Vanessa tonight. Do not call Emily. Do not go back to that lake. Do you hear me?" "I hear you." "What do you want to do right now, honestly?" My jaw tightened. "Drive back out there and put my fist through a door." "I know," Walter said. "And that is exactly why you are not going to do it. Because the second you do that, you become the problem. You become the unstable husband. And whatever they are planning, and Harold, they are planning something. This is not a spontaneous affair. This is organized. Whatever it is, you just handed it to them." He paused. "You're a clockmaker. What do you do when a movement is broken?" I closed my eyes. "You find the mechanism before you touch anything." "That's right," Walter said. "Find the mechanism. Then we decide what to do about it, together." We talked for another hour. By the time I hung up, something had settled in my chest. Not peace, not even close, but a direction. The specific relief of knowing which way to walk, even when the ground is unsteady. Vanessa came home Sunday afternoon. I was in the shop when I heard her key in the front door, and I took 3 slow breaths before I walked through to greet her. She looked rested, happy, a little sunburned across the nose. "How was it?" I asked. "Wonderful," she said, smiling and kissing my cheek. "Gloria sends her love." "Good," I said. "I'm glad you had a good time." I went back to the shop. I sat at my bench. I picked up the supplement bottle I had brought from the kitchen counter and turned it over in my hands, reading the label for the 100th time. Then I opened the back door and poured every capsule into the trash. Tomorrow, I would start finding the mechanism. The first thing I noticed when I stopped taking the supplement was the mornings. They came back to me slowly, the way light comes back after you step indoors from the bright sun. Gradually, then all at once. By the 4th day without the capsules, I woke up at 6:15 and my head was clear before I even finished my first cup of coffee. Sharp in a way it had not been in months. I stood at the kitchen window and watched a pair of cardinals work through the bird feeder in the backyard, and I could read the expression on their faces. That is how clear I felt. Vanessa watched me across the breakfast table. "You seem better this morning," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Slept well," I told her, and smiled into my coffee. I had moved the supplement bottle from the trash to a paper bag in the back of my truck. I would need it later. I did not know exactly why yet, but I knew I would need it. Walter came by the shop Monday afternoon. I flipped the sign to closed, and we sat in the back room with the door shut, and I told him what I had been thinking since Sunday night. Walter listened with his arms crossed and his head down, the way he used to listen to witness statements, fully, without interrupting, saving his questions for the end. When I finished, he looked up. "The iPad," he said. "You mentioned Emily used it when she visited. The one on the kitchen counter. We both used it." "Check the deleted messages," Walter said. "Not the inbox, the deleted folder. People forget about the deleted folder." I had not thought of that. That evening, after Vanessa left for a late meeting, I sat at the kitchen counter with the iPad and went through the deleted messages folder. It took me 40 minutes, and my reading glasses kept fogging from the heat of my own breath because I was leaning in too close. But I found them. 3 messages between Emily and Vanessa, deleted. But Vanessa had been logged into her email through the iPad's browser rather than the Mail app, and the browser session had not been closed. The drafts folder still held 2 of them. A third had been moved to trash, but not permanently purged. The content made my stomach drop straight through the floor. Emily had arranged the cover story, not suggested it, arranged it. She had coordinated the Gloria alibi, confirmed the dates with Vanessa, and in one message, written with the casual efficiency of someone managing a calendar, "Conrad wants the property assessment done before end of quarter. Keep Dad relaxed. Keep Dad relaxed." I set the iPad down on the counter and pressed both palms flat against the tile and breathed through my nose until the heat behind my eyes receded. The next morning I called Walter and read him the messages. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm going to pull Conrad Bale's property records from the Greene County Recorder's Office. Public record, anyone can access it. Give me 2 days." He called back in 1 day. "Harold," he said, and his voice had the particular flatness of a man delivering news he wishes he did not have. "Conrad Bale has purchased 7 parcels of land in a 2-block radius around your shop over the past 22 months. Every single one of them, except yours." I walked to the window and looked down at Mason's Clockworks. The sign I had hung in 1994, the oak work table Earl Cutter had built by hand and left me when he retired. The walls lined with clocks that people had trusted me to care for. "He wants the land," I said. "He wants the whole block," Walter said. "Your shop is the last piece. Without it, he cannot build. And he has been trying to take it through Vanessa and Emily," Walter said. "Harold, this did not start with Vanessa. Someone got to Emily first. Someone found out she was afraid of losing her inheritance when you remarried and used that fear like a key." The pain that moved through my chest then was different from what I had felt at the lake. That had been shock. This was something colder, more specific. The particular hurt of understanding exactly how something broke and why. "Conrad found the crack," I said quietly, "and he put Emily in it." "That's what it looks like," Walter said. I nodded, though he could not see it. Outside the window, Springfield went about its morning. Cars on West Elm. A woman walking a dog past the shop front. Everything ordinary. "All right," I said. "Then we find out what else he has put in motion." I had been seeing Dr. Patricia Hale for 11 years. Her practice was on South National Avenue, a clean, no-nonsense office with good lighting and a waiting room that always smelled faintly of coffee. She was 55 years old, precise in the way that good doctors are precise, and she had a manner of delivering difficult information that managed to be direct without being unkind. I trusted her the way you trust someone who has never once told you what you wanted to hear when what you needed to hear was different. I called her office Monday morning and asked for the earliest available appointment. Her receptionist offered me Wednesday at 9. I took it. I brought the paper bag from the back of my truck. Inside it was the amber supplement bottle, still about 2/3 full, and a handwritten list of the symptoms I had experienced over the past several months. the forgetting, the morning fogginess, the way my concentration had started to slip in the shop. I had written the list Sunday night at the kitchen table while Vanessa slept upstairs, and my hand had been steady the whole time, which surprised me. Dr. Hale read the list without expression. Then she picked up the supplement bottle and examined the label carefully, turning it over twice. "You want me to have this analyzed?" she said. It was not a question. "I want to know what's in it," I said. She looked at me over her reading glasses. "Harold, is there something specific you're concerned about?" "Yes," I said. "I'm concerned that what's in this bottle is not what the label says is in this bottle." She held my gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, set the bottle on her desk, and picked up her pen. "I'll send it to the lab this afternoon. I'll have results by Friday." She paused. "I also want to ask you directly, are you safe at home?" The question landed harder than I expected. My throat tightened, and I had to clear it before I could answer. "I'm safe," I said. "I just need to know what I've been taking." The results came back Friday afternoon. Dr. Hale called me herself rather than having her receptionist relay the message, which told me something before she said a word. "Harold," she said, "the supplement contains lorazepam. It's a benzodiazepine, a prescription sedative. It's not listed on the label, and it should not be in an over-the-counter supplement under any circumstances." Her voice was careful and even. "The dose is low, but taken daily over several months, it would cause exactly the symptoms you described: memory issues, morning confusion, reduced concentration." I was standing in the back room of the shop. My free hand found the edge of the workbench and gripped it. "All right," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "What happens now?" "Now I have a legal obligation," she said. "Under Missouri statute, I am a mandated reporter. When I have evidence of potential elder abuse, I am required to file a report with Adult Protective Services. I cannot delay that." "I understand," I said. "However," she continued, "I have spoken with the APS intake coordinator this afternoon. Given the circumstances, the fact that you are aware, competent, and actively gathering information, they are willing to open the investigation quietly. They will not make contact with anyone in your household for 30 days while you continue. After that, they move forward regardless." She paused. "Harold, what you have here is serious. This is not a civil matter. This is a crime." The word landed in the room and stayed there. I thanked her and hung up and stood at my workbench for a long time. Outside the shop windows, West Elm Street went about its afternoon. A delivery truck, a woman pushing a stroller. Everything normal and ordinary and completely separate from what was happening inside my life. Lorazepam. Someone had been putting a prescription sedative in my food every morning for 6 months. Someone who kissed me on the cheek and told me she loved me and asked me how I was sleeping. That evening, Conrad came for dinner. He arrived with a bottle of wine and that easy, expensive smile, and shook my hand at the door. "Harold," he said warmly, "you look well." "I feel well," I said. "Come in." I had never meant anything less in my life. But I smiled, and I meant that even less, and I was becoming very good at both. Hold on, before we go any further, drop a 7 in the comments if you're still watching. I want to know you're here, because what Harold does next is something most people would never have the patience to do. This story contains some fictional elements added to bring the message to life more fully. If you'd prefer to step away, this is your moment. Otherwise, let's keep going. Conrad Bale had a gift for making you feel like the most important person in the room. I had noticed it the first evening he came to the house. The way he angled his body toward you when you spoke. The way he remembered small details from previous conversations and worked them back in naturally. The way his attention felt like a spotlight that you did not want to step out of. It was a skill, and it was a very good one. And understanding that it was a skill did not make it any less effective when directed at you. What made it manageable now was knowing exactly what it was for. The dinner that Friday went the way Conrad wanted it to go, which meant it went the way I needed it to go. He talked about the antique watch market, about a restoration project he claimed to be overseeing in Kansas City, about the value of legacy businesses in changing neighborhoods. He was warm and engaged and subtly, consistently working towards something. "You know what I admire about you, Harold?" he said over the second glass of wine, leaning back in his chair, with the ease of a man who owns every room he sits in. 40 years in one place, one craft. Most men your age are looking for an exit. You never did. Never wanted one, I said. That's rare. He nodded slowly, as if I had said something profound. But it does raise a question. What happens to all of this when you're ready to step back? The shop, the property, everything you've built. You've thought about that? Some, I said, because a man in your position, and I say this as someone who genuinely respects what you've built, a man in your position needs the right structure around him. Legal, financial, people who understand asset protection. He glanced at Vanessa and smiled. That's all I mean. Vanessa smiled back, the specific smile of someone receiving a cue. I nodded and said I appreciated his perspective and changed the subject to baseball, because it was April and the Cardinals were 4 games into the season, and Conrad, whatever else he was apparently a genuine fan. He lit up talking about the bullpen situation with an authenticity that was almost charming. Under the table in the front pocket of my shirt, the small digital recorder I had purchased at an electronics store on East Battlefield Road was running. Missouri law permits any party to a conversation to record it without notifying the other parties. I was a party to this conversation. Everything Conrad said over that dinner table was going onto that recorder with my full legal right to put it there. 3 days later, Conrad called me at the shop. He wanted to stop by that afternoon, he said, just briefly, to drop off some documents he thought I might find useful. Estate planning materials. He hoped I did not mind. I told him I did not mind at all. He arrived at 2 o'clock with a manila envelope and that same easy smile. And we sat at the kitchen table while he walked me through what he called preliminary asset protection structures. The documents were dense with legal language that I did not fully follow, which I suspected was the point. At one point, he set a pen on the table beside the documents and said casually, "Nothing to sign today, of course, just familiarizing yourself." The pen stayed on the table for the rest of the meeting. I did not touch it. When he left, I called Walter from the back room of the shop. "He brought documents," I said. "What kind?" "Estate planning, asset transfer structures." He left a pen on the table. Walter made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a curse. "He left a pen on the table," he repeated. "Harold, that man has done this before." "I know," I said. "You get it on the recorder. Every word." "Good." Walter paused. "Call Nora Sloan tomorrow morning. First thing. Do not wait another day." I looked down at the manila envelope Conrad had left behind, sitting on my kitchen table like something that belonged there. The pen was still beside it. I picked up the pen and dropped it in the kitchen drawer and closed it. "First thing tomorrow," I said. I did not sleep well that night. I lay in the dark beside Vanessa and listened to her breathe and thought about a pen sitting in a kitchen drawer and a manila envelope full of documents designed to look like they were helping me. At some point, around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep entirely and went downstairs to the shop and sat at my bench until the sky outside the windows started going gray. By the time I called Nora Sloan's office at 8 o'clock, I had been awake for most of the night, and I was running on coffee and the particular cold clarity that comes when exhaustion burns away everything that isn't essential. Her receptionist answered on the second ring. I gave my name and said I needed an appointment as soon as possible today if there was anything available. There was a pause, the sound of a keyboard, and then, "She has a 9:30 cancellation. Can you be here by then?" Yes, I said, I can. Nora Sloane's office was on the third floor of a building on Campbell Avenue that had been a bank in a previous life. You could still feel it in the architecture, the high ceilings, the thick plaster walls, the sense of a space built to hold things of weight and consequence. Her name was on the door, in plain black letters, no flourishes, no tagline beneath it, just Nora Sloane, attorney at law. I had gotten her name from a retired circuit court judge I knew through the Springfield Rotary Club, a man named Howard Beckett, who had sat on the bench for 22 years and chosen his words with the care of someone who understood their value. When I had asked him for a recommendation, he had thought for exactly 3 seconds and said, "If you need someone who won't flinch and won't be impressed by money, call Nora Sloane." I was about to find out if he was right. She met me at the door herself, rather than sending her assistant, which I took as a good sign. She was 52 years old, with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the kind of face that had decided somewhere in its 40s to stop performing anything it didn't feel. Her handshake was firm and brief, and she led me directly to the chair across from her desk, without small talk, which I appreciated more than I could say. "Coffee?" she asked, sitting down. "No, thank you," I said. "I've had enough to last the week." She almost smiled. "Then tell me everything. Start wherever it starts for you, and don't edit. Editing is my job, not yours." So I told her. I talked for 45 minutes without stopping. I told her about Vanessa and the supplement and the lorazepam Dr. Hale had found in it. I told her about Table Rock Lake and the bungalow and Emily standing in the doorway with her coffee mug. I told her about Walter and the property records from the Greene County Recorder showing Conrad's systematic acquisition of the land surrounding Mason's Clockworks. I told her about Conrad's visits to the house, the manufactured incidents of forgetting the manila envelope, the pen left on the kitchen table like a suggestion. I told her about the recorder in my shirt pocket and the conversations I had captured under Missouri's one-party consent law. Nora took notes in a small yellow legal pad throughout all of it, writing in a compressed, efficient hand that moved steadily across the page. She did not interrupt. She did not react visibly to anything I said, which I found steadying rather than unsettling. I had not come here for sympathy. I had come here for someone who could look at what I had and tell me what it meant and what to do about it. When I finished, she set her pen down and was quiet for a moment, reviewing what she had written. Then she said, "The manila envelope, do you have it with you?" I slid it across the desk. She opened it and removed the documents one by one, reading each page with the methodical patience of someone who had spent 30 years learning where the important sentences hide in documents designed to obscure them. She turned pages without comment. She went back and reread 2 sections. She made a small mark in the margin of one page with her pen. Not a note, just a mark. The kind you make when something registers. Then she stopped. She was on the 4th document. She read it twice. Then she set it flat on the desk and turned it so I could see it and tapped the bottom of the page with 2 fingers. "This is a durable power of attorney," she said. "Do you know what that means?" "Generally," I said. "It gives someone authority to act on my behalf." "A durable power of attorney gives someone full legal authority over your financial and property decisions," she said. "Not just in specific circumstances, in all circumstances, including and especially in the event that you are deemed unable to manage your own affairs. Whoever holds this document can sell your property, access your accounts, make binding financial commitments in your name. It is one of the most powerful legal instruments a private individual can hold over another." She paused. "This form names Vanessa Mason as the sole holder of that authority. There is a signature line at the bottom with your name typed beneath it." I looked at the signature line. "I never signed that," I said. "I know," she said. She opened the top drawer of her desk and removed a manila folder, which she had apparently prepared before I arrived. Inside it was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of a document filed with the Greene County Recorder's Office. She placed it beside the document from the envelope. "This was filed 6 weeks ago," she said. "I pulled it this morning when your name came up in our conversation scheduling system. Walter Greer called ahead last evening and gave me enough context to do some preliminary research." She placed the two documents side by side and pointed to the signatures. "That is the filed copy. That is the document Conrad brought to your house. The signatures are different from each other, and both of them are different from your actual signature, which I obtained from a property deed you signed in 2019 that is on public record." I looked at the three signatures arranged in a row on her desk. The differences were visible even to someone who is not a document examiner. The letter formation was close. Whoever had done this had practiced. But the pen pressure was wrong throughout. Heavier on the downstrokes than my natural hand, and the baseline of the letters drifted upward at the end of the name in a way mine never does. Someone had sat somewhere with paper and a pen and practiced writing Harold Mason until they thought they could pass it off as the real thing. They had not practiced quite enough. The heat that rose in my chest was so sudden and so complete that I pressed my back hard against the chair and breathed through my nose until it receded. It took longer than I expected. I was 65 years old, and someone had practiced my handwriting and then walked into a government office and filed a document that would give them legal control over everything I had spent 40 years building. And they had done it 6 weeks ago, while I was having dinner with them and asking about their day and smiling at the right moments. "What does this mean legally?" I asked. My voice was tight, but it held. Nora folded her hands on the desk. "It means we have a serious criminal matter," she said. "Missouri Statute 570.090 covers forgery. Filing a forged document with a government agency is a Class C felony in this state. That carries up to 7 years in prison." She let that settle for a moment. "Combined with what Dr. Hale found in your supplement, we also have Missouri Statute 570.145, financial exploitation of an elderly person. That is a Class B felony if the value of the assets involved exceeds $25,000. Your property, Harold, the shop, the land, the house, exceeds that threshold by a considerable margin. Class B felony carries up to 15 years. I sat with that. "And Conrad. Conrad is more complex, but potentially more serious," she said. "If we can establish that he directed, coordinated, or funded any part of this scheme, and your recordings may help us do exactly that, we are looking at federal charges. 18 United States Code 1343, wire fraud, using electronic communications to facilitate a scheme to defraud. That is a federal felony, with a maximum sentence of 20 years per count." She looked at me steadily over her reading glasses. "Men like Conrad Bale have spent their lives believing their financial resources make them untouchable. They are frequently wrong about that, when the evidence is organized correctly." She picked up her pen again. "After today, I will contact the Adult Protective Services Coordinator who received Dr. Hale's report," she said. "We will work together on this. My intention is to have APS coordinate their investigation timeline with ours so that nothing moves publicly until we are ready." She looked up. "I want to file for an arrest warrant before you make any public move. I want the warrant approved and officers ready before Conrad or Vanessa have any reason to suspect the ground is shifted. Do you understand what I'm asking you to do in the meantime?" "Keep doing exactly what I've been doing," I said. "Exactly," she said. "Smile. Shake his hand. Let her prepare the supplement you won't be taking. Give me time to build this correctly." She paused. "How long until the anniversary party?" 8 weeks, I said. She nodded slowly, the nod of someone running calculations. 8 weeks is enough, she said. It is not comfortable, but it is enough. She set her pen down and looked at me directly. Harold, I want to ask you something and I need an honest answer. Go ahead, I said. Can you hold this for 8 more weeks? Not just legally, personally. Can you sit across from these people at your dinner table and maintain the performance for that long without breaking? I thought about it honestly. I thought about Walter's voice on the phone. I thought about 40 years of working with movements smaller than my thumbnail, of holding a mainspring at the precise tension required, not too tight, not too loose, for as long as the repair demanded. I'm a clockmaker, I said. Patience is not something I learned. It's something I do. Nora looked at me for a moment. Then she picked up her pen, opened her legal pad to a fresh page and said, "Then let's get to work." We spent the next 2 hours going through everything I had. The recordings, the photographs, the lab report from Dr. Hale, the property records Walter had compiled. Nora organized it all into a structure I could follow, assigning each piece of evidence to the charge it would support, identifying the gaps that still needed filling, outlining the additional recordings that would strengthen the wire fraud case against Conrad. Specifically, by the time I left her office, it was past noon, and Campbell Avenue was busy with the lunch crowd, and the sky had gone from the pale morning blue to the deeper, warmer blue of a Missouri afternoon in late spring. I stood on the sidewalk outside the building for a moment and looked at the street. 8 weeks. I had come in here this morning with a manila envelope and a kitchen drawer full of questions. I was leaving with a plan, a lawyer, and a deadline. I put my hands in my pockets and felt the small recorder on one side and my father's watch on the other. Both of them doing exactly what they were built to do. I walked to my truck and drove back to the shop. 56 days. We had work to do. 56 days sounds like a long time until you are living inside them one at a time. The first week after I met with Nora, I developed a routine that I maintained with the same discipline I applied to every long restoration project. Methodically, without rushing, trusting the process even when the process was uncomfortable. I woke up at 6:15. I went downstairs and watched Vanessa prepare the supplement she believed I was still taking. I took the capsule from her hand and thanked her, and walked to the kitchen window. And while she went to get dressed, I emptied it into the drain and rinsed the sink and dried it with a dish towel so there was no trace. Then I made my coffee and went to the shop and opened for the day. I did this every morning for 8 weeks. I want you to understand what that costs. Not the physical act that took 30 seconds. What it costs is the sustained performance of being someone slightly less than yourself. Every morning I looked at my wife across the kitchen and said good morning and asked if she had slept well and listened to her answer and responded appropriately. And every morning some part of me observed this exchange from a distance and noted the specific texture of the lie. Not my lie, hers. But I was participating in it, which made it feel like mine too. And that feeling accumulated over days and weeks into something heavy that I carried in my chest constantly and could not set down. Walter came by the shop on Tuesday and Thursday evenings after I flipped the close sign. He would come through the back, not the front, and we would sit in the workroom with the door locked and go through what I had collected that week. I had purchased a second recorder from the same electronics store on East Battlefield Road, a backup in case the primary failed, and I kept both of them charged and ready. Missouri law was clear. I was a party to every conversation that took place in my own home, which meant every word spoken in those rooms was mine to record. The conversations between Vanessa and Conrad were careful. They were not careless people, and they understood at some level that caution was required. But careful is not the same as silent. And over the first 3 weeks, I accumulated 5 recordings of substance phone calls, taken in the kitchen, a conversation over dinner when Conrad had stayed late and they believed I had gone to bed, one exchange in the living room that had been the most difficult to sit through, because they had been discussing me by name, and the specific details of what they referred to as the transition. The transition. That was the word they used for what they were planning to do to my life. I played that recording for Walter on a Thursday evening in the 3rd week and watched his jaw tighten in a way I had never seen on him before. Walter Greer was not a man who showed anger easily. 22 years with the Springfield Police Department had taught him to keep his reactions internal and his face professional. But something about hearing that word, transition, spoken so casually about a man he had known for 30 years, produced a tightness in his expression that he did not try to conceal. "Harold," he said when the recording ended. "I know," I said. "That man has done this before," Walter said. "The language is too practiced. Nobody talks about taking someone's property and life away from them that smoothly the first time they do it." I had thought the same thing. I had mentioned it to Nora on our weekly call, and she had said she was already looking into Conrad's history in Kansas City, and that what she was finding was, in her precise way of putting things, consistent with a pattern. What Nora was finding, it turned out, was 2 previous instances in which elderly property owners in the Kansas City area had transferred significant assets to entities connected to Conrad Bale under circumstances that had later been questioned but never successfully prosecuted. In both cases, the individuals had been elderly living alone and had reportedly experienced cognitive difficulties in the period leading up to the transfers. In both cases, the transfers had been structured to appear voluntary. In both cases, Conrad had been tangentially present in the lives of the individuals through intermediaries. When Nora told me this on the phone one evening, I sat at my bench for a long time after we hung up, without moving. He had done it before. He had found elderly people living alone, people with property he wanted, and he had found ways to make them seem incapable and their assets available. He had done it at least twice that Nora could document, and possibly more times that she could not. And when he had looked at Harold Mason, 65 years old, recently remarried, showing signs of cognitive difficulty in the mornings, he had seen exactly what he had seen before. A target. A mechanism already partially compromised. An outcome that was, from his perspective, simply a matter of patience and execution. The cold anger that had been living in my chest since Table Rock Lake shifted then into something different. Not hotter. I did not get hot about this. I did not have the luxury of hot, but more specific, more purposeful. The anger of a man who understands that what is happening to him is not personal. It is professional. He is not the first, and if nothing is done about it, he will not be the last. I told Walter about Kansas City the following Tuesday. He listened without interrupting, his coffee going cold on the bench beside him. When I finished, he looked at the clocks on the walls for a moment. He always looked at the clocks when he was thinking. I had noticed this over the years. As though their movement helped him process. And then he looked at me. "We need to get this to Nora's contact at the FBI field office," he said. "The Kansas City cases put this into federal pattern territory. That changes the weight of the wire fraud charge considerably." "She's already on it," I said. Walter nodded. He picked up his coffee, found it cold, set it back down. "How are you doing?" he asked. Not about the case. The way he said it made that clear. The question landed somewhere tender, and I had to take a breath before I answered. "I'm tired," I said honestly. "Not sleep tired. The other kind." "I know," he said. "Some mornings I sit in the truck in the driveway for 5 minutes before I go inside," I said. "Because once I go inside, I have to be the version of me that doesn't know anything. And getting from this version to that version takes a minute." Walter looked at me steadily. "You know what Earl Cutter used to say, when you brought him a movement that had been damaged by someone who didn't know what they were doing?" I knew exactly what Earl used to say. I had heard it 50 times standing in his workshop on Walnut Street when I was 23 years old and learning everything I knew about this work. But I let Walter say it because I needed to hear it from someone other than my own memory. "He said the damage isn't the hard part," Walter said. "The hard part is caring enough to fix it right instead of just getting it running." I looked at the bench in front of me, at the tools I had used for 40 years, at the movement I had been working on that week, a small French carriage clock someone had brought in with a broken click spring and a worn crown wheel, neither of which was difficult to address once you had correctly identified what was actually wrong. "How many weeks left?" Walter asked. 5, I said. He nodded once and stood up and pulled his jacket on. At the door, he stopped and turned back. "Harold." "Yeah?" "For what it's worth, Earl would have liked how you're handling this." He did not wait for me to answer. He just turned, put on his jacket, and put his hand briefly on my shoulder. One firm press, then gone. I heard the back door open and close. Some things do not need words between people who have known each other long enough. One firm press, then gone. I heard the back door open and close. Some things do not need words between people who have known each other long enough. I sat alone in the shop for another hour. The clocks kept their time around me the way they always did, indifferent to what I was going through, faithful to what they were built for. I serviced the carriage clock and replaced the click spring and cleaned the crown wheel and tested the movement. And when it started running, I set it on the shelf beside the window and listened to it tick. Outside on West Elm, Springfield was settling into its evening. The streetlights came on. A car passed slowly. Somewhere down the block, a screen door opened and closed. 5 weeks. I reached into my pocket and took out the recorder and checked the battery. Full. I set it on the bench in front of me and looked at it for a long moment. Then I thought about something I had not let myself think about clearly until that evening. Emily was going to call. I did not know when, but I knew she would. Because the plan required her to. Because the timeline was tightening and there were documents still unsigned, and she was the one they had designated to apply the personal pressure that Conrad and Vanessa could not apply themselves. She was going to call, and she was going to ask to come for dinner. And I was going to say yes. And I was going to make the pot roast. And I was going to sit across from my daughter at the kitchen table where her mother had sat for 30 years, and I was going to record every word she said. I sat with that for a while. Then I put the recorder in my shirt pocket, turned off the bench light, and went inside to start the pot roast marinade for a dinner that had not been scheduled yet. Some things, when you have been a clockmaker long enough, you simply know are coming. She called on a Wednesday afternoon, 4 weeks before the party. I was at the bench working on a 19th century American bracket clock, a Seth Thomas mahogany case. The kind of piece that requires full attention because the movement is idiosyncratic in ways that do not reveal themselves until you are already deep into the disassembly. My phone was on the shelf beside me, face up, the way I always kept it in the shop. When it rang and I saw Emily's name on the screen, I set down my tools carefully, the way you set things down when you need your hands to be steady for what comes next. I let it ring twice. Then I picked up. "Dad." Her voice was warm and familiar, the voice I had known for 35 years, the voice that had called me in the middle of the night when she had a fever at age 9, and when her car broke down on I-44 at age 22, and when she needed to hear a familiar voice after her mother's diagnosis. The voice that had said, "Daddy," the way small children say it, with the full weight of trust in a single word. "Emily," I said. "How are you?" "I'm good," she said. "I'm really good, actually. I've been thinking about you. I feel like we haven't really talked in a while, just the two of us." "It has been a little while," I said. "I was wondering." She paused, and in the pause I heard the practiced quality of it, the fraction of a second too long, the beat of someone who has rehearsed what comes next. "Would it be okay if I came for dinner Sunday? Just you and me? I miss you, Dad. I miss just sitting at the kitchen table and talking." My chest did something complicated. Because the thing about Emily, the thing that made all of this harder than anything else in this entire situation, was that underneath the rehearsed pause and the calculated timing, there was a real daughter who had genuinely sat at that kitchen table and talked with me for 35 years. The manipulation was real, and the relationship it was manipulating was also real. Both things were true simultaneously, and I did not know how to hold both of them without one of them crushing the other. "Of course," I said. "Come Sunday, I'll make pot roast." "Your pot roast." Her voice lifted with something that sounded like genuine pleasure, and maybe it was, and maybe that was the saddest thing of all. "Dad, you know that's my favorite." "7 o'clock," I said. "It'll be ready." After I hung up, I sat at the bench for a long moment without moving. Then I reached under the bench and took out the recorder, checked the battery, full as always, and set it on the shelf at eye level where I could see it and remember what Sunday was going to require of me. I spent Saturday marinating the meat the way Diane had always done it. Red wine, rosemary, a bay leaf. Left overnight in the refrigerator in the ceramic dish that had been a wedding gift from someone whose name I could no longer remember. The house smelled like it used to smell on Saturday evenings, when Emily was small and Diane was cooking, and everything in the world was in its right place. I stood at the kitchen counter and breathed that smell, and felt something in my sternum tighten so sharply that I had to put both hands flat on the counter and hold on. Sunday came the way Sundays do, quietly, with light. I had the pot roast in the oven by 4 o'clock. Pearl onions, carrots, the splash of red wine and the braising liquid that Diane had always said was the detail that made the difference. By 6:30, the house smelled like every Sunday of a childhood I could not give back to either of us, and I stood in the kitchen in the particular stillness of a man preparing a meal for someone he loves and grieves at the same time. I put the recorder in my shirt pocket at 6:45, checked it once, did not check it again. Emily arrived at 7 o'clock exactly. She had always been punctual. Diane's punctuality, the same as her mother's eyes, and her mother's way of tilting her head when something interested her. She was standing on the front porch in a light jacket, her hair down, holding a bottle of wine in both hands. And when I opened the door and saw her face open, smiling, so familiar it hurt in a way I could not have described to anyone. My throat tightened so suddenly that I had to clear it before I could speak. "Hi, Dad." She stepped forward and hugged me the way she had hugged me since she was tall enough to reach my shoulders. Her arms went around me and she held on, and I held on too, longer than usual. Longer than I probably should have, because I was 65 years old, and this was my daughter, and some part of me was still trying to find the version of this evening where none of what I knew was true. She smelled like the same shampoo she had used since college. Some things do not change. You do not notice them until you are holding on to them, and understanding that you may never be able to hold on to them the same way again. "Come in," I said. "It's almost ready." We ate slowly. The pot roast was right. I knew it was right, from the smell before I even plated it. The specific smell of Diane's recipe done correctly. The kind of smell that is also a memory. Emily took her first bite, and her eyes closed for just a moment, involuntarily, the way they close when something lands exactly where it is supposed to. "God, Dad," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the second word, the crack of someone hit unexpectedly by something they were not prepared for. "That is exactly right. That's exactly how Mom made it." "Her recipe," I said. "Down to the bay leaf." Emily looked at her plate. "I know," she said quietly. "I know it is." We talked for 40 minutes about ordinary things. Her work, a patient who had made her laugh that week. A new dentist at the practice she was not sure about yet. My work. The Seth Thomas bracket caulk I was halfway through a Vienna regulator someone had brought in from Joplin that was going to require a new suspension spring. The drive down from Nixa. The weather, which had been doing the thing Missouri weather does in late spring. Warm one day and 30 degrees colder the next. I watched her while we talked. Not with suspicion. I had moved past suspicion weeks ago into something that was simply observation. The watchmaker's reflex. The habit of looking at a mechanism and noting every movement without judging it. Yet she was comfortable. She laughed genuinely at least twice. She asked about the shop with what appeared to be real interest. And underneath all of it, I could see the thing that Conrad had found and used like a key. The real grievance, the genuine wound. Emily had grown up watching her father spend himself on clocks, while her mother ran the household and raised the child and kept the life together. That was not nothing. That was not invented. Harold Mason had not been a perfect father, and his daughter had feelings about that which were legitimate and old, and had never been properly addressed between them. Conrad had not created that wound. He had simply found it, the way a bad structural engineer finds a crack in a foundation and applies force to it rather than reporting it. That understanding did not make what she was doing acceptable, but it made it comprehensible, and comprehensible was something I could hold without breaking. She set down her fork at 8:15. "Dad." Her voice shifted, not dramatically, just the way a room shifts when someone opens a window. Something changed in the air. "I want to talk to you about something, and I need you to hear me out before you react, okay?" "Okay," I said. She reached into her bag, which was hanging on the back of her chair, and took out a folded document. She set it on the table between us, with the careful, deliberate movement of someone who has practiced this specific gesture. "Vanessa and I have been talking," she said. "We're worried about you, Dad. The forgetfulness, the mornings. We've both noticed it, and we've talked to each other about it, and we think—" She paused. "We think it's time to put some things in place, just as a precaution, just to make sure you're protected." She unfolded the document and turned it so I could read it. Secondary power of attorney. Joint authority granted to Vanessa Mason and Emily Mason over financial and property decisions in the event of cognitive incapacity. Harold Mason's signature required. I read it carefully. I read it the way Nora had taught me to read things, looking for what it actually said underneath what it appeared to say. I read the definition of cognitive incapacity, which was broad enough to cover a range of circumstances that a cooperative physician could certify without difficulty. I read the clause that specified the authority was durable, meaning it survived and operated independently of my ability to contest it once granted. I read Emily's name beside Vanessa's name at the top of the document. My jaw tightened. Behind my eyes, something burned hot and sudden, and I looked down at the pot roast on my plate and breathed through my nose 3 times until the burning receded enough that I could speak without my voice betraying me. I looked up at my daughter. Her hands were folded on the table. Her expression was arranged into concern, real concern, possibly, or the memory of real concern, or something that had once been real and had since been redirected. I could not tell anymore. That was one of the things this situation had taken from me, the ability to read my own daughter's face with confidence. "That's a big step," I said carefully. "Can I think about it?" "Of course." She reached across the table immediately and covered my hand with hers. Her hand was warm, and her grip was gentle. And it was my daughter's hand. The hand I had held crossing streets when she was 4 years old. And it was doing what it was doing, in service of a plan designed to take everything I had built. Both of those things were true at the same time. "Take all the time you need," she said. "We just want what's best for you. You know that." "I know," I said. I squeezed her hand once. She squeezed back. We finished dinner talking about nothing in particular, the way you finish a meal when the real conversation has already happened, and both people know it, and neither person says so. She left at 9:30. I stood on the porch and watched her taillights disappear around the corner onto West Elm. And then I stood there for another minute in the dark, with the June air around me and the moths working the porch light above my head. Then I went inside. I washed the dishes. I put the leftover pot roast in the refrigerator in the ceramic dish. I wiped down the counter and hung up the dish towel and turned off the kitchen light. Every ordinary thing. Every gesture of a man maintaining the shape of a normal evening. Then I walked to the shop and sat at my bench in the dark and took the recorder out of my shirt pocket and set it on the wood in front of me. I did not play it back. I already knew everything on it. I reached into the corner of the bench and picked up the photograph of Emily at 6 years old, her holding a pocket watch, laughing because it had just started to tick. Her whole face open with the uncomplicated delight of a child who has just understood how something works. I had kept that photograph on the bench for 29 years. I looked at it for a long time. Then I set it face down on the bench. Not in the drawer, not thrown away, just face down. Because I was not ready to put it away entirely, and I was not able to look at it anymore tonight. I sat in the dark with the clocks ticking around me for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called Walter. "We have everything we need," I said when he answered. My voice was steady. It cost me something to make it steady, but it held. The secondary power of attorney, her voice on the recorder explaining the plan, all of it. Walter was quiet for a moment. "Harold, I'm all right," I said. "I just needed to tell someone." "I know," Walter said. "I'm glad you called." We stayed on the line for a few minutes without talking much. That was one of the things about a friendship of 30 years. Sometimes the talking is not the point. Sometimes you just need the line to be open. 4 weeks, I said eventually. 4 weeks, Walter said. I hung up and set the phone on the bench beside the recorder and the face-down photograph, and sat with all of it in the dark until the clocks told me it was midnight and time to go to bed. We met on a Tuesday evening 4 weeks before the party at Nora's office on Campbell Avenue. I arrived first. The building was quieter at this hour than it was during the day. The bank of elevators in the lobby reduced to a single operational car. The overhead lighting dimmed to the energy-saving level that made every hallway look slightly more serious than it actually was. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor and found Nora's door unlocked, and Nora already at her conference table, with the case file open in front of her and a legal pad at her right hand, and 2 pens positioned parallel to each other at the top of the pad, which I had come to understand was how she indicated she was ready to work. She looked up when I came in. "Harold, coffee's on the credenza. Help yourself." I poured a cup and sat down across from her and looked at the file. 3 inches thick now, maybe more, tabbed with color-coded dividers that Nora had organized by charge category. 1 tab for the forgery evidence, 1 for the financial exploitation documentation, 1 for the wire fraud materials, 1 for the medical evidence from Dr. Hale. 8 weeks of work reduced to a set of colored tabs. It should have looked small. It did not look small. Walter arrived 7 minutes later, which, for Walter, meant he had been in the parking lot for at least 10 minutes thinking things through before coming up. He came through the door with his jacket already off and folded over his arm, and the expression of a man who has been running scenarios since he woke up that morning. "Nora," he said by way of greeting. "Walter," she said, "sit down. We have a lot to cover." He sat. He looked at the file the same way I had looked at it. Then he looked at me. We did not need to say anything. 30 years of friendship had compressed a great deal of communication into the space between 2 people looking at each other. Nora opened the file and placed the contents on the table, methodically, the way a surgeon lays out instruments. Each piece of evidence in its specific position, nothing overlapping, everything visible and accessible. The photographs from Table Rock Lake, the audio recordings, 7 of them, each in a labeled sleeve with the date, duration, and a 1-line summary of the content. The laboratory report from Dr. Hale's office. The forged power of attorney with the 3-way signature comparison. The property records from the Greene County Recorder showing Conrad's land acquisition pattern. And now, newest edition, the recording from Sunday evening, Emily at the kitchen table, her voice on tape presenting the secondary power of attorney with the specific language Nora had flagged as legally significant. Nora stood at the head of the table and looked at all of it spread out before her for a moment. Then she said, "This is enough. This is more than enough. But I want to say that out loud in this room before we go any further, because I think both of you need to hear it stated clearly." She looked at me directly. "Harold, what you have built here over the past 8 weeks under circumstances that would have broken most people is a comprehensive and legally airtight evidentiary package. You should know that." My throat tightened unexpectedly. I picked up my coffee cup and held it with both hands and did not say anything for a moment. Walter cleared his throat. "The warrant?" he asked. "The DA's office filed yesterday afternoon with the Greene County Circuit Court, based on the package I submitted to them in coordination with APS," Nora said, sitting down. "I worked with the DA's office to submit a warrant application, supported by affidavits from Dr. Hale, the APS coordinator, and my own analysis of the forged document. Given the elder exploitation statutes and the documented pattern, including the Kansas City cases, I was able to bring to the federal prosecutor's attention. The judge signed the warrant this morning." Walter sat forward. "This morning, signed and issued," Nora said. "Conrad, Bale, Vanessa Mason. Pending review of Emily Mason's specific liability." She opened a folder and slid a copy across the table to each of us. "The warrant will be executed the night of the party. I have coordinated with 2 officers from the Springfield Police Department who will be present outside the landmark ballroom in plain clothes. They will enter on my signal." I looked at the warrant in my hands. Harold Robert Mason, listed as complainant. Conrad Bale, listed as primary defendant. Vanessa Mason, listed as co-defendant. The charges enumerated in the precise legal language of the state of Missouri, each one specific and documented and supported by the material spread out on the table in front of us. I had looked at a lot of documents in my life. I had signed leases and deeds and contracts and the papers that transferred Earl Cutter's business into my name 22 years ago. None of them had felt like this one felt. "The technical setup at the ballroom," Walter said. He had his notebook out now, a small, spiral-bound one he carried in his jacket pocket, the same kind he had used during his years on the force. "I've already spoken with the venue coordinator, told her it was a surprise video presentation for the anniversary. She was very helpful. The screen is 12 feet wide, ceiling-mounted, with a separate audio system that runs through the main speakers. I can control both from a laptop at the back of the room." He looked at me. "Everything you have on those recordings, I can have it formatted and sequenced before Friday. What order do you want it?" I thought about it. "Photographs first," I said. "Table Rock Lake. Give the room a moment to understand what they're seeing before the audio starts." Walter wrote that down. "Then the recordings," I continued. "Vanessa and Conrad first. Then Emily." I paused on Emily's name. "Then Dr. Hale's report. Then the forged signature comparison." "Ending with the forgery," Nora said, nodding. "That's correct. The forgery is the most legally legible piece for a general audience. Everyone in that room will be able to understand what they're looking at without any legal training. It's the right note to end on before I come through the door." "Conrad will have lawyers there within the hour," Walter said. He was not arguing the point. He was running the scenario the way he always ran scenarios, looking for the weak points before they became problems. "Conrad can have whoever he wants," Nora said with a flatness in her voice that I had come to recognize as the sound of a woman who had been in rooms with powerful men's lawyers many times and was no longer impressed by the category. "The warrant is signed, the evidence is documented and legally obtained. His lawyers will not be able to challenge the admissibility of a single piece of it. What they will be able to do is manage the proceedings on his behalf going forward, which they are welcome to do." She paused. "In my experience, men like Conrad Bale respond to one thing above all others: exposure. Public, documented, irrefutable exposure, in front of people whose opinion of them matters. That is what is going to happen in that ballroom. His lawyers can't put that back in the bottle." The room was quiet for a moment. Outside the windows of Nora's office, Campbell Avenue was doing its Tuesday evening business. A restaurant across the street filling up headlights moving through the intersection. Below the ordinary traffic of a city that had no idea what was being planned on the 3rd floor of a building that used to be a bank. "There's one more thing I want to address before we leave tonight," Nora said. She set her pen down and looked at me with the directness that I had come to understand was not coldness, but a form of respect she did not. soften things for me, because she had correctly assessed that I did not need them softened. Emily, I held her gaze. I want you to understand what that is going to look like in that room, she said. When the recording plays, when her voice comes through those speakers in front of people who have known you and her for decades. I have been in courtrooms and deposition rooms and boardrooms for 30 years, and I can tell you with some confidence that there is no way to predict exactly how a person responds when they are publicly exposed in that manner. She may cry. She may become angry. She may try to speak. She may simply shut down. Nora paused. Whatever she does, you cannot respond to it. Not in that room, not in that moment. Do you understand what I'm asking? I understand, I said. Because your instinct in that moment is going to be to go to her, Nora said. You are her father. That does not stop being true because of what she did. And that instinct, however understandable, will undermine everything you have built if you act on it in that room. My jaw tightened. I looked at the table for a moment, at the recorder in its labeled sleeve with Sunday's date on it, at the three-way signature comparison with my name written in two different hands that were not mine. She made her choices, I said quietly. Over a period of months with full knowledge of what she was doing, she made her choices. I looked up at Nora. I will make mine. Nora looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once, the nod of a person who has asked a hard question and received a sufficient answer. Good, she said. Walter drove me home afterward. We took the long way, which neither of us mentioned or needed to explain. South on Campbell, east on Battlefield, north on National. The route that takes you past the shop on West Elm before it brings you home. When we passed Mason's Clockworks, the sign was visible in the headlights. Same sign I had hung in 1994, same lettering, a little weathered now in the way of things that have been outside for 30 years and have earned the right to show it. 3 weeks, Walter said when he pulled up in front of the house. 3 weeks, I said. I got out and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The house was lit and warm. Vanessa visible through the living room window. The ordinary domestic scene of an ordinary house on an ordinary Tuesday evening in Springfield, Missouri. From the outside, it looked like exactly what it was not. I walked up the front steps. Inside, Vanessa called from the living room that there was soup on the stove if I was hungry. Thank you, I called back. I'll be in the shop. I went through to the shop and did not turn on the overhead light. Just the small lamp on the bench, the one that had been in the same position for 20 years. I sat down and looked at the Seth Thomas bracket clock, still waiting for me to finish its restoration. The movement partially disassembled on the bench, the way I had left it. I picked up my loop and looked at the movement for a long time without touching it. 3 weeks. Every piece in its right position, the mechanism understood, the failure point identified, the repair designed and ready. All that remained was execution. I set down the loop and put both hands flat on the bench and felt the familiar smoothness of the wood under my palms, worn by 40 years of the same gesture. Then I picked up my tools and got back to work. I woke up at 5 in the morning the day before the party and could not go back to sleep. Vanessa was beside me, breathing slowly and evenly. She had come to bed late. I had heard her on the phone in the kitchen after 11, her voice low and brief, the kind of call you end quickly when you want no one to hear it. I had lain still and said nothing. Now her face was relaxed in the particular way that people look when they believe everything is going according to plan. I lay there for several minutes looking at the ceiling. Then I got up quietly, pulled on my clothes in the dark, and went downstairs to the shop. I did not make coffee. I just unlocked the connecting door and walked in and stood there in the early dark with the clocks ticking all around me. 30 years. I had opened Mason's Clockworks on a Tuesday morning in April 1994. I was 35 years old, and I had $4,000 in a checking account, and a lease I could barely afford, and a set of tools Earl Cutter had spent 40 years collecting. Diane had taken the day off from Robertson Elementary and stood at the front window and taped the sign to the glass, and then turned around with that enormous smile and said, "You are going to be just fine." She had been right. She was usually right. I walked slowly through the shop, running my hand along the edge of the main workbench, the way you touch something you have touched so many times the gesture has become unconscious. The wood was smooth from decades of use, darker in the places where my hands rested most often. I knew every inch of this bench. I knew every shelf, every drawer, every clock on every wall. There was a Vienna regulator on the east wall that I had restored in 2003 for a woman named Helen Briggs, whose grandfather had brought it from Austria in 1922. She had cried when I handed it back to her running. I had charged her $200 and felt guilty about it. There was a Seth Thomas mantel clock on the shelf near the window that had come in with a cracked mainspring and a seized pallet fork, and a note taped to it that said simply, "Please help." No name, no number. I had fixed it and left it on the shelf and waited. Nobody ever came back for it. It had been running on that shelf for 11 years. There was a small carriage clock in the back cabinet that had belonged to Diane's mother, which Diane had left me in a box of things her sister brought over after the funeral. I had serviced it myself. It ran 3 seconds fast per day, which I had never corrected because Diane had always run slightly ahead of everything around her, and it seemed right. I sat down on the stool at the bench and put my face in my hands. Not crying. My chest was too tight for crying, the kind of tight that lives on the other side of tears, past the point where they would actually help. I sat like that for a while and let myself feel the full weight of what tomorrow was. Not the legal part, not the evidence or the warrant or the recordings, just the human part. The part where a man stands up in a room full of people and ends his marriage and severs his daughter and watches everything he thought he had rebuilt collapse in front of witnesses. After a while, I lifted my head and reached into the cabinet under the bench and took out the pocket watch. It had belonged to my father. A 17-jewel Illinois pocket watch from 1911, gold-filled case, white enamel dial. He had carried it every day of his working life and left it to me when he died. And I had serviced it myself 3 times over the years and kept it running because it seemed important that it keep running. I wound it carefully, set the hands, held it to my ear and listened to the beat, even steady, each tick exactly like the last. I am not a man who was fooled, I thought. I am a man who chose to trust. There is a difference, and it matters. I set the watch on the bench in front of me and watched the second hand move. Tomorrow it would be over. Tomorrow I would walk into the landmark ballroom and do what needed to be done. And whatever came after would come after. But right now it was 5:30 in the morning and the shop was quiet, and my father's watch was running, and somewhere upstairs Vanessa was sleeping, and everything was exactly as it appeared. For the last time. The landmark ballroom on a Friday evening in June looked exactly the way a 30-year anniversary celebration should look. Round tables with white linen centerpieces of small gears and clock faces arranged around candles, the venue coordinator's idea, which I had approved over the phone without really thinking about it, and which now struck me as either perfectly appropriate or deeply ironic, depending on how the evening ended. The lighting was warm and low. A string quartet played near the entrance. The room smelled like good food and cut flowers, and the specific combination of cologne and perfume that happens when 100 people who dress well gather in an enclosed space. I stood near the entrance and shook hands for 40 minutes. Former customers, colleagues from the Springfield business community. A man named Robert Ashby, who had brought me his great-grandmother's carriage clock in 2007 and still sent a Christmas card every year. my accountant, my insurance agent, people who had known Mason's Clockworks for decades and had come tonight because 30 years meant something to them, and because I had meant something to them. And I shook every hand and remembered every name and felt the weight of all of it pressing down on my chest in a way that had nothing to do with the occasion. Vanessa was magnificent. I mean that without any warmth. She worked the room with the ease of someone who had been preparing for this specific evening for a long time. Touching arms, remembering names, laughing at exactly the right moments. She wore a dark green dress I had not seen before, and her hair was done, and she looked, by any measure, like a woman who belonged on the arm of the man she had married. She touched my hand twice in the first hour. Both times, I squeezed back and smiled. Conrad arrived at 7:15. He came through the entrance in a dark suit with a pocket square and that unhurried walk of a man who has never been anywhere he was not welcome. He found me near the bar and shook my hand with both of his, the grip of a man who wants you to feel the sincerity, and said, "Harold, 30 years, you should be proud." "I am," I said. He moved into the room and I watched him go. Emily arrived 7 minutes later. She was wearing the blue dress she had worn to her mother's funeral, which I did not think was intentional, but which landed in my chest like something thrown hard. She hugged me at the door and said, "Dad, the room looks beautiful." And I told her thank you and held on for exactly the right amount of time and let her go. By 8 o'clock, the room was full, and the quartet had shifted to something quieter, and the dinner service had begun. I sat at the head table, with Vanessa on my left and Robert Ashby on my right, and I ate and talked and drank half a glass of wine and watched the room with the peripheral attention of a man who has been watching rooms carefully for 3 months. Walter was near the audio-visual equipment at the back of the room, talking to the venue technician with the relaxed manner of someone who belongs there. He had arrived early to set up and had texted me at 6:45, ready. Nora was at a table near the left wall, alone, with a glass of water and her phone face down on the table. She caught my eye once across the room and gave me nothing, no nod, no signal, just held my gaze for 1 second and looked away. The calmness I felt surprised me. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I had expected something more dramatic from my own body, a racing heart, a dry mouth, the physical announcement of what was about to happen. Instead, I felt the specific stillness that comes at the end of a long repair, when all the parts are back in place and the movement is assembled, and all that remains is to wind the mainspring and see if it runs. At 8:47, Vanessa set down her fork and touched my arm. "I think it's time," she said softly with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She pushed back her chair and stood up, reached for the microphone the venue coordinator had left at the head table. The room began to quiet around her, the way rooms do when someone is about to speak. I let her get almost all the way to standing. Then I put my hand over hers on the microphone and said quietly, so only she could hear, "Actually, I'd like to go first." Her hand went rigid under mine. For one fraction of a second, something moved behind her eyes that was not the expression she had been wearing all evening. Then I stood up, and the room went fully quiet. And I looked out at 100 people who had known me for 30 years, and I said clearly, so everyone could hear, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. I have something I'd like to share with you before we continue." I looked at Walter. He nodded once. The screen behind me lit up. Stop right here, type 30 years in the comments before I tell you what that screen showed to a room full of 100 people. Harold had spent 8 weeks building toward this one moment, and it was about to change everything for everyone standing in that ballroom. A note: some elements of this story are fictional, added to deepen the message. If you'd prefer not to continue, this is a natural place to stop. For those staying, You're about to see why patience is the most powerful thing a person can carry. The first image on the screen was a photograph taken on a Saturday morning in March at Table Rock Lake. Vanessa and Conrad outside Bungalow 11 at Lakeview Lodge. His hand at the small of her back, both of them laughing. The image was clear. My phone had good resolution, and the morning light had been excellent, and it filled the 12-foot screen behind me with a specificity that left absolutely no room for interpretation. The room made a sound I had never heard before. Not a gasp exactly, something more collective than that. The sound of 100 people understanding something at the same moment. I did not turn around to look at the screen. I had seen it. I looked at the room instead. Conrad's expression did not collapse. I had expected it to collapse, and it did not. Because Conrad Bale had spent 70 years maintaining his expression under pressure. And that did not stop working just because the pressure had become enormous. What happened instead was subtler. A stillness, a recalibration behind the eyes. The specific look of a man running through options and finding fewer than he expected. Vanessa's hand went to the table. Both hands flat on the white linen, the way you put your hands down when your legs are considering giving out. The photograph was taken on the morning my wife told me she was visiting a friend, I said to the room. My voice was even. I had practiced being even. The friend was not present. I nodded at Walter. The second thing that appeared on the screen was a transcript, and then the audio began. Vanessa's voice filled the ballroom, her actual voice, warm and familiar, saying things over my kitchen table that she had not known were being recorded. Conrad's voice answering her, the two of them discussing in specific terms the power of attorney, the property transfer, the timeline, the plan to have me declared unable to manage my own affairs. The room had gone so quiet, I could hear the string quartet outside in the foyer still playing, unaware. Emily made a sound. I heard it from across the room. A sharp inhale, almost a cry, immediately swallowed. I did not look at her. I could not look at her yet. The audio ended. Walter advanced to the next item. Dr. Hale's laboratory report appeared on the screen. I read it aloud slowly and clearly because some people in the room would not be familiar with the terminology, and I wanted them to understand every word. Lorazepam, benzodiazepine, prescription sedative, present in the supplement my wife had prepared for me every morning for 6 months. Someone at a table near the back said out loud, without apparently meaning to, "Oh my God." The forged power of attorney came next. Nora had prepared a side-by-side comparison my actual signature from a document I had legitimately signed in 2019, placed next to the forged signature on the filed document. The differences were visible even from the back of the room. The pen pressure, the baseline drift. Someone had practiced my handwriting and had not practiced it quite enough. I heard Conrad push back his chair. A small sound, controlled, but I heard it. The door at the left side of the ballroom opened. Nora Sloan walked in. She was carrying a leather portfolio and walking with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows exactly where she is going and why. Behind her, 2 officers from the Springfield Police Department followed her into the room. They were dressed as other guests, but when Nora nodded toward Conrad, they reached into their jackets and held up their credentials. The room shifted again. A collective movement, chairs turning, necks craning. Conrad looked at the officers, then he looked at Nora. Then, for the first time all evening, he looked at me. Really looked at me. Not the performance of attention he had been giving me for months. The actual thing, stripped of all the technique. I looked back at him. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the pocket watch. My father's watch. I set it on the table in front of me and looked at it for one moment. The white enamel dial, the steady second hand, every tick exactly like the last. I reached up and took off my wedding ring. The room was completely still. I set the ring on the table beside the watch. I looked at Vanessa. Her eyes were full, and her hands were still flat on the table, and she was breathing in the shallow, rapid way of someone trying very hard not to come apart in public. "You thought age made me blind," I said. My voice did not shake. "It only made me patient." Emily's cry broke open then, not the swallowed sound from before, but the real thing, ragged and raw, the sound of someone who has understood too late what they have done. Several people near her moved instinctively, reaching out, and she bent forward over the table with her face in her hands and her shoulders shaking. I looked at her for one long moment, then I picked up my father's watch, put it back in my pocket, and walked toward the door where Walter was already standing, with my coat over his arm. The air outside the landmark ballroom was cool and smelled like cut grass and the particular cleanliness of a June night in Springfield, when the humidity has not yet arrived. Walter held my coat while I put it on. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Behind us, through the closed doors of the ballroom, I could hear Nora's voice, measured, precise, explaining something to someone who was not going to enjoy hearing it. I could hear Conrad's attorney, who had apparently arrived within minutes, speaking in the urgent, elevated register of a man who has just understood the situation and does not like it. I could hear faintly the sound of Emily still crying. I buttoned my coat. Walter fell into step beside me, and we walked to the parking lot. "How do you feel?" Walter asked. I thought about it, honestly. "Like a clock that just finished striking," I said. "Everything released, nothing left wound up." Walter made a sound that was mostly exhale. "That's the best thing you've said in 3 months." We sat in his car for a while without going anywhere. The parking lot of the landmark was bright with the lights of 2 Springfield PD cruisers that had pulled up while we were walking out. Through the ballroom windows, I could see movement, people standing, gathering coats, the specific restless energy of a room that has witnessed something it did not expect and does not know what to do with. Nora called at 9:43. "Conrad is in custody," she said without preamble. "His attorney has already filed for bail, which will likely be granted given his financial resources, but the charges are federal as well as state, which complicates that considerably. We'll know more in the morning." She paused. "Vanessa has been served. She left with her sister. The civil proceedings will begin next week under Missouri law. Given the documented fraud, she will not receive any share of your marital assets. The judge will hear that motion within 30 days. "Emily?" I asked. Nora's voice was careful. "She left voluntarily. No charges tonight. Her role is more complex and the DA will review the recordings. Harold, I want you to prepare for the possibility that Emily may face criminal charges as well. The secondary power of attorney she presented you carried her name as joint beneficiary of the fraud." I looked out the windshield at the Springfield night. A couple walked past on the sidewalk holding hands, entirely unaware. Ordinary life, 10 feet away. "I understand," I said. "Go home," Nora said. "Get some sleep. I'll call you tomorrow morning with the full update." She hung up and I held the phone in my lap for a moment. Walter started the car. He drove me home on West Elm without asking if that was where I wanted to go, because he knew it was. The house was dark when we pulled up. Vanessa's car was gone from the driveway. The porch light was on. I had left it on out of habit, the way I always did. The way I had done for 30 years when I expected someone to come home. I looked at it for a moment. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my father's watch and held it in my palm. "Walter?" I said. "Yeah." "Thank you." He put the car in park and turned to look at me with the expression of a man who has been your friend for long enough that gratitude between you is almost unnecessary, but still means something. "Harold," he said, "don't thank me. Just go inside." I nodded. I opened the door and got out and stood on the sidewalk in front of my house on West Elm Street in Springfield, Missouri on a Friday night in June, 65 years old. holding my father's pocket watch. The porch light hummed softly in the warm air. I walked up the front steps and unlocked the door and went inside. The house was quiet in a way it had not been quiet in a very long time. Not the wrong quiet, not the hollow quiet of a space where something is missing. Just quiet. The ordinary, uncomplicated quiet of a house that belongs to one person and knows it. I went to the shop. I sat at my bench. I set my father's watch on the wood in front of me and watched the second hand move in its steady, untroubled circle. Outside Springfield was doing what Springfield does on a Friday night in June. Cars on the street. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and stopped. The world going on the way it does, indifferent to what any one person has just been through. I reached out and put one finger on the watch case. Cool and smooth, and exactly what it had always been. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow we start the rest of it. 3 weeks after the party, I opened Mason's Clockworks on a Tuesday morning, the way I had opened it every morning for 30 years. 6:45, the key in the lock. The door swinging inward on hinges I had oiled in March and would oil again in September. The smell of the shop wood and metal and the faint mineral scent of clock oil reaching me the moment I stepped inside the way it always did, the way I hoped it always would. I made coffee in the back room, black, no sugar, same ceramic mug I had used since 1998, the one with the hairline crack along the handle that I had never gotten around to replacing, and by now, never would. I sat at the bench and let the ticking settle around me. 30 clocks, 40 on a busy intake week, each one keeping its own time, running at its own tempo, and together they made something that was not noise, not exactly, but a kind of layered presence, the way a choir is more than the sum of its individual voices. I had worked inside that sound for 30 years. I did not know how to think clearly without it. The legal proceedings were moving the way legal proceedings move, slowly with paperwork, with phone calls from Nora every few days, updating me on developments. I was working to understand and mostly succeeding at. Conrad had been released on bail, as Nora had predicted, but the federal wire fraud charges meant his passport had been surrendered. His financial accounts were likely to come under court supervision as the proceedings moved forward. The DA's office had already requested the relevant orders. His attorney had begun negotiating, which Nora said meant they understood the evidence was not going to cooperate with their preferred version of events. Vanessa had retained her own attorney and moved to Kansas City to stay with her sister. The civil proceedings were underway. Under Missouri law, given the documented fraud and the criminal charges, the court had agreed to hear an expedited motion on asset division. Nora expected a ruling within 60 days. She expected it to go the way it needed to go. I had stopped asking her to be more specific than that. I had learned over these past 8 weeks that certainty in legal matters was something people promised and courts delivered on their own schedule. Emily had not been charged. The DA had reviewed the 7 recordings and determined that while her role had been significant, the deleted iPad messages, the coordinated cover story, the dinner at Harvest Table where she had steered the conversation away from the supplement, the primary criminal liability rested with Conrad and Vanessa. She had received a formal letter from Nora's office informing her that she had been removed from my will entirely and that any future contact attempts would be directed through legal counsel. She had not tried to contact me. I did not know yet what I felt about that. Some mornings I felt relieved. Some mornings I picked up my phone and set it back down without doing anything with it. Some mornings I looked at the photograph of her at 6 years old. I had moved it from the bench to the drawer, face up, and felt something that did not have a clean name. That was all right. Not everything required a clean name. A watchmaker learns that early. Some movements do not announce the moment of failure. They simply stop, and you take them apart carefully and find the truth of the thing without ceremony. I was on my second cup when the bell above the front door rang. A woman came in carrying a paper bag, held carefully in both hands, the way people carry things they are afraid of dropping. She was in her 70s, small, white-haired, with the deliberate movements of someone whose joints had begun requiring more consultation than they used to. "Are you Harold Mason?" she asked. "I am," I said. She set the bag on the counter with the quiet relief of someone setting down something long carried. "My husband passed in February," she said. Her voice was steady, but her chin moved slightly when she said it. The involuntary movement of grief that is still recent enough to surprise the body. This was his. He bought it at an estate sale 40 years ago and never could get it running right. He always meant to bring it in to you. She looked at me directly. I thought I should finish what he started. I opened the bag carefully. Inside was a bracket clock, English mid-1800s fruitwood case with brass fittings. The door glass cracked along one corner. I lifted it out and turned it in my hands. The movement was seized. I could feel it from the weight, from the absence of any internal shift when I tilted it gently. Frozen solid. Someone had wound it past its limit a long time ago, and never had it seemed to. "I'll take a look at it," I said. Her eyes filled. "He would have liked that," she said. "He really would have." After she left, I set the clock on the bench and got my loupe and began the preliminary examination the way I always begin, slowly, methodically, looking for the failure point before I touched anything. A bracket clock of that age deserved patience. So did most things in my experience, if you were willing to give it. The bell above the door rang again at 9:30. Walter came in carrying 2 cups from the coffee place on Commercial Street, the ones with the proper lids and the steam still rising from the small opening. He set one on the bench beside me without asking whether I wanted it, because he had known me long enough to know the answer to that question before he asked it. "How does it look?" he said, nodding at the clock. "Seized escapement," I said. "Wound past the limit. Probably 30 years ago, maybe more." I set down the loupe and picked up the coffee. "It'll take some time." Walter pulled the stool around to the other side of the bench and sat down. He wrapped both hands around his cup and looked at the clock with the expression of a man entirely comfortable with silence that has good company in it. "Harold," he said after a moment. "Yeah." "You doing all right?" I considered the bracket clock on the bench in front of me. The cracked glass, the seized movement, the fruitwood case that someone had cared for well enough that it had survived 150 years and still had good bones. Still worth saving. Still worth the hours it would take. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." I picked up my tools and began. Outside on West Elm Street, Springfield went about its Tuesday morning the way it always had. Unhurried, ordinary, indifferent to the private upheavals of the people moving through it. The light through the shop windows was the particular gold of early summer, warm and level, falling across the workbench the way it had fallen across this bench for 30 years. The clocks ticked on. My father's pocket watch, the 1911 Waltham, wound that morning at 5, as it was wound every morning, rested in its place at the corner of the bench. I reached out and rested one finger on the case, cool and smooth, exactly what it had always been. Some structures, when you care for them properly, do not simply endure. They keep accurate time long after the hands that built them are gone. That is not a small thing. In 30 years behind this bench, I had come to believe it was one of the most honest things I knew. I lifted the bracket clock, positioned the loupe, and got to work. They improve. People ask me what I learned from all of this. Here is my honest answer. I learned that trust is not weakness. Choosing to believe in someone is not foolishness. What happened to me was not my fault. It was the fault of people who looked at an old man living alone and saw an opportunity instead of a human being. I learned that Grandpa's stories like mine are more common than anyone wants to admit. Older men living quietly, targeted precisely because they are quiet. If you have a father, a grandfather, someone you love who is aging and alone, Pay attention. Not just to the big things, to the small things. The amber bottle on the counter. The signature that doesn't look quite right. I believe God puts certain people in our lives at exactly the right moment. Walter was that person for me. I do not take that lightly. And here is what I want to say directly as one human being to another. Do not wait until someone has taken everything before you ask for help. That is the lesson of this family story. Not the confrontation in the ballroom, not the recordings. The lesson is the Tuesday morning I finally called Walter and told him the truth. These are the grandpa stories that don't make the news. These are the family stories that happen in quiet houses on ordinary streets. They deserve to be told. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, there are more family story accounts like this one waiting for you here. Thank you for staying until the end.